Hello Year 11s, this is the marking of the active transport exam. Make sure you have your green and blue pens ready. So starting with question 1, it says water and mineral ions are needed in plants, and you have to identify which row in the table identifies the correct process of how water and mineral ions move. So you're looking at how water is transported. Well, we know that only one of them is linked to water, and that is osmosis, so it's between A and B. And how are mineral ions transported? Well, it can't be osmosis, and therefore it's active transport, so the correct letter is A. Question 1b, which of the following processes take place against the concentration gradient? So against the concentration gradient means from a low to high concentration. The other way will be along, and here the only one is active transport. Next, it says to describe the process of active transport in root hair cells in plants. Well, if we look here, I've drawn a root hair cell here, and we know plants take in mineral ions from the soil into the root hair cell. So the soil will have a very low concentration because active transport works from low to high, and inside the root hair cell it will have a high concentration, and that is what you write down. So firstly, it's mineral ions. They move from the soil, which has low concentration, to the root hair cell, which has a high concentration. Secondly, it will be against the concentration gradient because, as I said, it's from low to high. And finally, it requires energy. It's called active transport, and active meaning it requires energy. Next question, why do plants need mineral ions? Well, the nice easy first answer is that it's for plant growth. The second reason is because it's used to make amino acids, more specifically with the nitrate ions. Now I understand it's missing the mark, and this is actually worth 2 marks, so the whole exam paper will be out of 32. Then we need to name the plant tissues which transports water and mineral ions from roots to the leaves, and they are the xylem vessels. And just as a reminder, the xylem vessels, they transport in one direction, again from the root to the leaves, and the movement is from the roots to the xylem vessels, through the xylem vessels, and then out through the leaves. And remember, all together this is known as the transpiration stream. Here is a diagram showing a plant root. The plant root is adapted for absorbing water from the soil. Identify the cells that make up the plant root, and you should know them as the root hair cells. Next, we're using the diagram to explain how plant roots are adapted for absorbing water. So first thing we notice in the diagram, there's lots of hairs, and that's the first answer. Lots of hairs meaning they will have a large surface area, therefore meaning because it's absorbing water, more osmosis would occur, and because it's specifically related to water there. Okay, next question says, the diagram below shows 4 ways in which molecules may move in and out of a root hair cell, and the dots show the concentration of molecules. So the first thing I would do when I see this is label H and L to show high and low concentration. So here it's high, low, high, low, high, low, and high. Then, as you can see, you've got the arrows moving in or moving out of the cell. So we're writing the correct letter A, B, C, or D next to each process. The first one is the movement of water molecules. Now, bearing in mind, water is going to try and move into the cell, firstly, and secondly, it's via osmosis. Now, we know in osmosis is from dilute to concentrated, and osmosis is a type of diffusion. So in other words, from high to low. So we're looking for ones that are going into the cell. So this one goes in and this one goes in. And again, from high to low, as I said, it's a type of osmosis, a type of diffusion. Osmosis is a type of diffusion, and therefore high to low will be D. The uptake of mineral ions, again, we know that's active transport, and we want to go into the cell as well. So we're looking for into the cell, and we know active transport is from low to high concentration, and therefore that is C. We move on. We need to give 3 differences between active transport and osmosis. And I know in your knowledge questions you had a big table which compared the 3, osmosis and active transport and diffusion. So I'm going to look at it from this perspective of osmosis. So firstly, in osmosis, no energy is required. It is what we call, it's passive, whereas active transport, as it says in the name, is active. We have osmosis is along the concentration gradient, meaning high to low concentration, whereas active transport is against the concentration gradient. And finally, in osmosis, it is only water, whereas in active transport, it moves ions, as you know, mineral ions. It can be glucose and amino acids in the gut. Next, here we see an epithelial cell in the lining of the small intestines, and it's interesting to note that food is being absorbed in this direction. So, and also lots of mitochondria as well. The first question asks, what is A? And as you can see, it's an animal cell, and so A is the nucleus. As you know, it controls the cell and contains genetic information. As a quick recap from Key Stage 3. Then, secondly, what is the name for the highly folded surface in the, and this is actually a mistake here, it should say in the lining, not limiting, the lining of the small intestines. Well, the whole highly folded surface is villi. And finally, we have suggest how the highly folded cell surface, in other words, the villi, helps the epithelial cell to absorb soluble food. Well, the villi leads to an increased surface area, and when you have an increased surface area, it leads to more diffusion occurring. And that's a really good thing, which is why we have it in our small intestines. How are most of them absorbed? Well, it's usually diffusion. And name one food molecule which is absorbed by active transport. Now, food molecules, one thing that we need in our bloodstream, we need glucose, which previously was digested from starch via amylase. We also need amino acids, which was previously digested by proteins, and the enzyme is protease. So those are the two that will need to be absorbed. And why is it necessary to absorb some food by active transport? Anytime you see the word active transport, you need to think it's against the concentration gradient. In other words, it needs to go from low to high concentration. That's why we need this process. It requires energy, and so for this process, why we have it in plant roots and why do we have it in our gut, in our small intestines, is because we are moving against the concentration gradient. Suggest why epithelial cells have many mitochondria. Well, mitochondria firstly is an organelle, and a mitochondria is a site of respiration. And in respiration, you should be thinking through respiration, oh, it produces energy. So Active transport requires loss of energy. It's called active. And where does that energy come from? Well, mitochondria is a site of respiration which releases energy. One thing to note, if you are talking about respiration and energy, it doesn't produce it. Please use the word release, because that's what they look for in the mark, in exams in the mark scheme. So the mitochondria is a site of respiration, and as you say, it releases energy. Okay, to the final question then. Some scientists investigated the rates of absorption by different sugars in the small intestines. And in one experiment, they used a small piece of intestine. In the second one, they had a small piece of intestine that was poisoned by a chemical that prevents respiration. So again, you're thinking, respiration, maybe it might be linked to energy. So if that's poison, there's no respiration. So no respiration, that means there's no energy. That's your thought process when reading a question like this. So here are our results. We have 4 sugars, A, B, C, D. We have the healthy intestines, how much is absorbed, and the poison intestines, where respiration they don't have, no energy. And remember, in any case, any absorption means something has moved, a process has happened. So we have to give 2 sugars which can be absorbed by active transport. Now we know if there isn't any energy from respiration, active transport can't occur. So we need to look at a difference, and there's only 2 there where it shows a difference. A, it's decreased, and B, it's decreased. C, it stayed the same, and D, it's increased slightly, but it isn't a big difference. So therefore we know A and B, something has occurred. We have to use the evidence from the table to explain why you chose the sugars. Well, firstly, we know that there is a decrease. So we can see that the poison has reduced the absorption. Then, secondly, we know that active transport requires energy. As you know, it's active and so it needs energy. Then lastly, where's that energy come from? Well, it's released from respiration. And because, as it says here, the poison prevents respiration, there isn't any energy. All of the sugars in the table are absorbed by diffusion. Remember, diffusion, as a reminder, it's passive. It is along the concentration gradient. And therefore it's from high concentration to low concentration. So explain how the information from the table provides evidence for this. Well, if we look at the table here, there is still some absorption going on, because if there was none absorption, no processes happening, no absorption, these will all be 0. So the first thing we mention is that even if there is poison, there is some absorption. And we know it's a passive process because diffusion doesn't require energy, and so without the energy, it does not require respiration to occur. And there we have it, and as I said, it's worth out of 32 because of the 2 extra marks.